All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. I am Angela Tupolaro, the Associate Vice President of Advancement and Alumni Engagement here at EC. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Today's workshop is being recorded and will be posted to our alumni playlist on the Elmira College YouTube channel. After the presentation, we will have time for some questions and answers. Thank you to those of you who have submitted your questions ahead of time. If you have any additional questions, though, during the presentation, please use the chat feature to ask those. And with that, I think we are ready to get started. So I will pass it over to President Lindsay to open the workshop.
Thanks, Angela, and welcome. Afternoon, everyone. So glad you could join us. This special presentation that's in honor of National Estate Planning Week. The college is delighted to partner with Dr. Kim Curtis, who's a partner at Cerity Partners. She's going to be walking us through the basics of estate planning. I want to say a couple things about Kim. She's a nationally recognized wealth management advisor and speaker. She's also an alum of Elmira College from the class of 1983, and she is a member of our board of trustees. She's going to be spending the next 20 to 30 minutes sharing tips on organizing your estate, saving you time, protecting your assets, and helping you establish your legacy. Important stuff. So after that, we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. So I'll turn things over to you, Kim. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. Delighted to be here on National Estate Planning Awareness Week. It started in 2008, and the reason it started is to remind people of the importance of having up-to-date estate plans. So when I think about that, how many of us really like to think about our estate and what we're trying to achieve? It's kind of something that doesn't sound very exciting. But let's begin to talk about it. So let's go to the first slide and let's dive in. Students don't just earn degrees, they change the trajectory of their lives and the lives of those around them. I love this slide, and I love Dr. Lindsay with the background of Elmira. And when I first read this, I actually felt the emotion because it did change my life. I met my spouse. I have longtime college friends of a lifetime, and I have a career success that I only could have imagined. So when I think about when I was asked to be here for National Estate Planning Week, I said yes. And the reason I said yes is I want to do everything I can to make Elmira College thrive. And Dr. Lindsay has done an enormous job during the most challenging times of institutions and private colleges through the pandemic and otherwise, to get us to a place where we're even having this conversation. How exciting is it for the future of Elmira College and where we see ourselves going? So with that in mind, let's dive in. Why estate planning matters. Most of us think of estate planning as money, finances. I like to think of it as P cube, people, purpose, and planning. And when we bring in that larger context beyond money, all of a sudden it becomes a topic that we care about. Not that we don't care about money, but we care about the people we love. And we also care about our values and we want to pass them on or share them beyond the assets. And also, of course, we want tax mitigation and reduce taxes. That's primarily what most of us think of when we think of estate planning. But if we can bring in these other two elements, it brings to a much more enriching experience, tying in the head and the heart. So let's go to the first one, people. People are the heart of every estate plan. Everything is human. Family dynamics drive outcomes far more than the documents, and communication and transparency around those topics build trust. So when you think about estate planning, think more about planning for harmony, not just wealth transfer. And so as we go to the next slide and we think about togetherness and community, the greatest legacy isn't just the wealth you leave, but the impact and opportunities you create for others. Coles Hall has always been a symbol of Elmira's enduring spirit. But for me, when I returned to campus after not being there for over 20 years, I went into Coles, and in the new chapel, there are stained glass windows, and the sun was shining, and the panes were just brilliant as it relates to illustrating the traditions of Elmira College, candlelight, Mountain Day. What was that other one? Holiday banquet. I loved the holiday banquet with the professors. But each tradition and the flicker of the light told a story of who we were and are becoming. And I love the metaphor about that as we talk today about the future of planning. I hope we can reflect on that same light, just as the stained glass transformed ordinary light into something really beautiful and lasting. So too can thoughtful planning turn our life's work into our enduring values personally, professionally, and also of this great institution. So now let's go to legacy. And legacy is beyond money. It's what is wealth to you? How do you define it? Your values, stories, and life lessons are your greatest inheritance, which is why those stained glass panes meant so much to me. Capture what matters most in letters of intent or legacy letters. We've done this with our clients. I ended up finding my great grandmother's journal in my mom's attic. And that journal took me back not only to my great grandmother's childhood, but it told me about her mother and her great grandmother. That's 5 generations that I was able to experience in that journal. And if you think about with me there, that's 150 years. Elmira has been around 170. Imagine the stories around that and how important it is for the people currently attending Elmira, the students, and what stories we could share with them and what we can give them value. And also in our own lives, in terms of our own families generationally, not only past, but also those not born yet. The Native American, there is a tradition with their elders, and it's something like, I'm paraphrasing it, but when the elders meet, they say some kind of prayer that says, as we make decisions for the tribe, maybe we think of those before us and also those not born yet in a 7 generational map. Imagine if we thought about that with our own individual family and not feeling so alone. So think about how that falls together, because when we incorporate traditions into family and talk about philanthropy, it allows for purpose to thrive. And without purpose, it's really hard to have fun on this planet. Why are you here? What's important? What's your impact? What is the fulfillment that matters most to you? And as parents and grandparents, we want to share that with our children and our extended family because we want them to understand that what we have is important and how can we help others to get the same. So let's move on to finally money, which we have as planning and financial stewardship. We want to protect, preserve, and pass on, most important, with intention. You want to align your financial plan with your goals and your values. And of course, tax strategies and charitable tools, which we'll talk about in a minute, to maximize that impact. And then, of course, we want to review and refresh your plan as things evolve. There are 4 documents, that you want to do. You want to make sure you have when you're addressing basics of estate planning. And those 4 documents are a will, 1, a power of attorney, a medical power of attorney, 3, and 4, a healthcare proxy. And so basically, 1 is to pull the plug, 1 is someone else to make decisions medically for you, the other is to make someone to make decisions for you financially, and your will is a disposition of where your money goes, or that could also be a trust. So, excuse me. With that being said, do you have all 4 documents? And some of them are easier to get than others. We tend to be slow on the will, but some you could just pull a form off depending on your state as it relates to the healthcare proxy. Um, so find out what your state requires and then follow up to see what you can do on your own if you need to, or use legal counsel to finish the complexity of what's important to you. So if we go past the money, let's talk about simple tools for giving. This is really important because this is why we're here. So what do we need to do? Like, great, Kim, we were talking about estate planning. The most important number one thing is to review your beneficiary designations, whether it's on your brokerage account, go to your bank. If you haven't put a transfer on death, it says TOD after your name. Sometimes they make you show up in traditional banks with who your beneficiaries will be. My mom made my sister and I, when we were both in town, go to her bank. We actually had to go to the bank and sign on as co. Actually, in this case, for my mom, it was we were co-owners versus transfer on death. But whatever you wish to do, have a beneficiary designation. One mistake that people make often is they don't update it, and they may have been divorced or widowed, and they have not updated those documents. Make sure it's the intention that you want, and whether it's an IRA, a life insurance policy, or even property. We have a client that lost her husband, and she created a life estate in New York. And with the life estate, it's this particular type of trust so that when she's no longer on the planet, her daughters immediately are owners, so the remainder of the trust. At her death, they become owners, and they were able and are able to sell the property immediately. And there's a step up in basis, and there's also a Medicaid planning around that. If you create a life estate, particularly, again, this is New York State, there is a 5-year Medicare look back. So it has to be in place for at least 5 years if that is something that's important to you. But that life estate really allowed for the simplicity of the transfer of those assets to the next generation quite easily. And then a donor advised fund. A donor advised fund is so simple, yet it sounds so complex. It's really opening up an account that happens to be a donor advised fund. Schwab has one, Fidelity has one, some community foundations have one. And it's opening up an account and then moving assets into that account. Oftentimes, assets get moved into a donor advised fund when there's highly appreciated stock and they want to move that asset into the donor advised fund. Or someone had a transition event where they sold their business and they have a large money coming in and they want to give some of that to the donor advised fund. When you put money into the fund, it's immediately it's a gift at that time. You don't have to distribute it in grants until whenever you choose to. And the fund actually can continue to grow with investments inside of it. So for a sale of a business or appreciated stock, it's great because it gets out of your hands. You get the deduction and you can decide where the gifts go, the grants, later. What the beauty of a donor advised fund is really to talk about philanthropy with your children. Oftentimes, people have instituted a donor advised fund instead of a foundation, but you can do it with a small amount of money, relatively small. I think some places have 5,000 as a minimum, others it may be 25,000 as a minimum. But it's very convenient and flexible. And inside of that, you click on a tab and it lists all these nonprofits that are available. And if yours is not in there, you can ask them to put it in there so that it's easy to transfer that money through gifts. And then lastly, a charitable remainder trust. It's income for you and the remainder, ideally, hopefully, some of that to Elmira College. And the gift officers can talk more about that. But primarily, you get income, and when we're no longer on the planet, the college receives the remaining income. Or the college could have income, and at your death, your family gets the asset. So there's lots of different ways to create charitable giving options that allow for you to be flexible and what is the needs of your family and what is the philanthropy that you're trying to achieve. So let's go to the next slide and talk more specifically. This is a real story of alumni's giving journey, and they created a donor advised fund. This was highly appreciated stock. Actually, it was corporate stock that they had for several years that had a very low cost basis inside of their company. And they to this day have had 20 years of grants. And decades later, to Elmira, scholarships still exist supporting students. And what's even better is that the donor has actually had conversations with their adult children, and their adult children are now inspired to give as well and totally understand the value of Elmira College to this original alum. So simple, even though it sounds complex, it's just an account opening called a donor advised fund, and allows you to have control as to when you choose to distribute those grants, but you get the deduction in the year that you deposit into the donor advised fund. So now let's talk more about some other practical giving strategies. I love this one in terms of some next steps. Those of you who have required minimum distributions and may not need the money, you can actually get a checkbook on your IRA and write out to the nonprofit. Hopefully, it may be Elmira College. And that way, you do not get income received from those required minimum distributions, RMDs. So it goes right to the nonprofit. You don't get the income stream into your income, ordinary income, and you're able to benefit an institution. We have a lot of clients that use this qualified charitable distribution. It's called a QCD. And instead of receiving RMDs, they use the QCDs directly into to the institution. The other, and I talked about this a little bit, but talk with your family about Elmira College. Share your treasured stories. Share your stories of family and generational stories. Those are the things that matter. Like I said, with my great grandmother's journal, I think that the blessing of stories is so transformational for our young people to hear, even our adult children to hear as they become parents and you become grandparents and share more stories along the way. And then, of course, consult your financial advisor or your legal advisor or the Elmira gift officer. But a qualified charitable distribution is a wonderful way to give to a nonprofit without having that income come into your income stream. I think here's where I want to talk about beneficiary. One of the questions that we had was whether you could do a transfer on death on a house. And the question is that some states actually allow for beneficiary deeds at death. And I also talked about the life estate, but it may be a little harder. So there's some work that you may need to do in transfer on death. So let's go now to Elmira College, the Iris Society. There are so many people that have cared about this institution, and it's called the Iris Society. And if that's important and something you would like to do, please notify the college so that they can recognize you. They recognize Iris Society members annually, and it's also an opportunity to inspire future generations of soaring eagles when they see again the tradition of giving. And also, please visit elmiracollege.edu under giving. They a host of resources there to help get you started as well. And then as we go to the last slide, close to the last slide, as we see these three generations, each lighting the way for the next, we're reminded that legacy isn't just what we leave behind. It's what we ignite in others. Estate planning, at its heart, is really about the light, ensuring that our values and our generosity to continue to shine through the people and causes that we care about. So I hope today's conversation inspires you to think about what you leave, not just what, but why, and who your light will guide next. So may the light you've carried from Elmira continue to shine. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate that thoughtful presentation. So now we will move to the Q&A portion. We'll start with some questions submitted ahead of time, but remember, if you have a question, please submit it into the chat and we will get to it. So Kim, our first question, what are some of the most common mistakes people make when creating long-term estate plans?
Yes, I mentioned one is not updating your beneficiary designations and not checking in to make sure they're what you intended. Two is creating a revocable trust and not funding it, not putting the assets inside, whether it's the change of ownership in your brokerage account or the beneficiary designation on the back end to implement that revocable trust. Attorneys are really great at drafting, but it's up to you with your financial advisor or others to make sure that the deeds and other assets are appropriately titled. Not verifying accounts, that we already talked about that. And then I would say the last thing is assets that pass to children or grandchildren, not taking into account protecting it from potential creditors or divorce claims. There's some simple things that you can do that protects the assets to allow for the transfer that you intended. So I would say those are the top three.
You may have already touched on this, but you may have additional thoughts on it. But what should long-term unmarried couples focus on when planning their estate?
So most states have common law. So whether it's married or unmarried, I think that a lot of that's almost an irrelevant point as it relates to gifting and transfer of assets. It's some of the similar things. There may be some things that you may not have access to in terms of the marital deduction. However, the way you give is similar to any other way to give. And quite frankly, it's almost more fun because it's not necessarily, well, long-term couple, I'm not sure if there are children involved in that, but the idea of creating something as an unmarried couple of what's important to you, whether you do it collectively or individually, have that conversation and then put it into action based on the things that we just described.
Thank you. Next question is how can individuals living abroad include Elmira College in their estate plans?
It really depends on where the asset that you want to give is located. If it's in the United States, it's relatively simple based on the US gifting laws. If the asset is outside of the country, you may have to because the country may not honor US taxation laws and gift laws, that you may have to draft a separate document to allow for that asset to transfer. So first question is, where's the asset? If it's in the United States, it's consistent with everything else that we've just discussed. If it's not in the US, I would check in with that country as it relates to what needs to be done to have that asset transferred to a US citizen.
The next question was, how can grandchildren be included in an estate plan?
Yeah, a document that seems to be used a lot right now is called a dynasty trust, and it allows to be able to gift the assets to children, but at your children's death, it goes to the grandchildren, and it allows for protection of creditors and also, again, divorce claims. So look into a dynasty trust as a way to initiate that gift.
What are some tax strategies for IRAs?
We talked about the qualified charitable distribution, QCD. Beneficiary designation is another way. And then at death, there are some laws around that that gets into a whole lot of different questions. I think that there's a maximum amount you can give from your IRA in any given year. I forget what 2025's amount is. I think it's a little over 100,000. And so you could just gift it. to different groups. But other than that, the RMD through qualified charitable distributions is helpful. And then, of course, beneficiary designation, and recognize that if it's an unmarried member, it usually has to be distributed within a 10-year timeline once you have received that beneficiary IRA. So there's lots of complexities around that that may be worth talking to a financial advisor or lawyer in drafting that. Because you could do unintended consequences to whoever you have given that to by putting them in a different tax bracket unnecessarily.
Let's see here. What are the pros and cons of taking Social Security benefits as early as possible, especially for those planning early retirement?
Love that. Isn't that the age-old question of when to take Social Security? I will give you the general answer to that. However, there are nuances all along the way. The first general answer is, how is your health? And do you have longevity in your family? If you have longevity in your family, then I may be slower to take it. Obviously, cash flow is the number one question. If you don't have the money and you need the money, obviously then health and longevity are irrelevant. But if you could delay it until for your full retirement age, and I think we're getting close to almost age 67 now as the full retirement age. And then if you delay after that to age 70, every year you delay is like an 8% rate of return on your money between now or 67 to age 70. So think about 8% on your money is kind of a good rate of return without risk. So that ideally, if you could get to age 70, is the common strategy that one would suggest for the maximum amount of Social Security income monthly. But there are so many variables that come into play that trigger a different outcome as to when to take it. I hope I've outlined some of that. But the most important variable is cash flow. And if you have a current job, you could have a part-time job that also pops you into a different tax bracket that they then may affect your Medicare premiums.
Okay. I think that concludes our questions. I don't see any in the chat. So then with that, thank you, Kim. I will pass it back to President Lindsay for our closing remarks.
Okay, thanks, Angela. And a really special thanks to Kim for taking the time today to lead us through this. I hope everyone found the workshop to be informative and helpful, whether you've already established a plan or you're just beginning to think about what financial wellness is all about. So as you're thinking about the plans, I encourage you to remember your life's passion, as Kim was talking about, really rounding the picture out, the people, the places that made a difference in your life. So, and if EC is one of those places for you, please feel free to reach out to Angela Toffolaro. She'll be happy to discuss how to carry your legacy forward. So, any last words, Angela?
I do. Thanks, Dr. Lindsay. Just some final housekeeping items. I have shared Kim's professional contact information if you wanted to reach out to her about some wealth management planning. Again, the recording will be available ideally tomorrow on the Elmira College YouTube channel. And in a few days, you will receive an email survey from us. It's just a quick short survey with a few questions just to provide us some important feedback on today's workshop and how you can help us improve. So again, thank you, Kim. Appreciate all that you've done today and your time. And this has been very helpful information. So thank you. Appreciate it. And with that, thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.